I hit the wall really hard, and I bent this thing better than I ever bent a race car ever. Andy wants to race one of your cars. He goes, great. He goes, getting experience? I'm like, no. He's like, you ever been in a racing school? I said, no. He's like, okay, well, we'll teach you. And there was like the chassis and the cab and the engine missing a fender, and there wasn't a corner on the car. There was one wheel on it, and the rear end's in the turn, in the middle of the front stretch. And I'm like, okay, I get it.
Jeff Stearns, connected through cars. If they're bigwigs, we'll have them on the show. And yes, we'll talk about cars and everything else. Here he is now, Jeff Stearns.
You've raced professionally, right?
Yeah, I raced in a couple of NASCAR series.
Pretty serious.
Yeah, it was very serious. We actually moved we were living in California. I was doing California NASCAR series, and we moved to my wife. Well, I got a job at a startup from some friends. My first startup I was involved in, first successful startup I was involved in, that moved me to Virginia. And Ann's like, well, you can race there better because it's more in the home of things. And so I picked up and moved to Virginia with my wife, to DC area. And I ran the Goodies Dash series there I knew from running the West and the Tour and those things that I was never going to be a Cup driver or probably even a Busch driver. And I wanted to run Daytona and Bristol. And the only way to run Daytona and Bristol on an oval is either ARCA, and could care less about ARCA. You can't get sponsors for it, or you couldn't then. You need Darnwell. I'm sure you can't now. Or the Goodies Dash series. And so the problem is I'm 6'4" and they're tiny cars. And so I got a hold of Michael Waltrip through some friends who is 6'4". And I said, so it's Andy Reid. You don't know me, but I'm friends with Schrader and those guys. And I'm trying to find out who built your Goodies Dash car. He goes, Charlie Weaver. And you call him up. And so I called Charlie Weaver up. And he's like, well, do you have any money? And I said, yeah, but I've also got a sponsorship deal with TRD. And he'd worked with TRD before, so we went Goodies Dash Racing. So, and it was my final series. And it was fun. I don't regret it. I'd never do it again. It ate so much money. It was unfathomable. And so much time. And I would never want to do it now because it's not nearly as fun. It's so much work.
Did you ever get scared?
Nah. Well, that's not true. In my last year, I was running this. I can't remember what car it was, but I was running it at like a little local racetrack just for some track time, and just messing around. And I lost concentration, and just in practice, right? And my wife was wanting us to go on this trip, and I was squeezing this race in, and it was like 4th of July weekend. It was like a Friday before the Saturday 4th. And so I was running this race, and my crew was down there and blowing around. And I lost concentration in practice going pretty good at this Manassas racetrack, which no longer exists, I don't think, but it was one of the old 1940s racetracks, been around forever. Terrible track, horrible lighting. And I hit the wall really hard, and I bent this thing better than I ever bent a race car ever. I was like, and I got out of the car all pissed off, and I looked at the car and holy crap, and I was in my last year, and I'm like, wow, this is dangerous. And it never really occurred to me then that it was dangerous. A friend of mine calls it, a racing friend of mine says, race car drivers have one thing in common, that's a lack of imagination about what could happen. And I gained my and I have a good imagination about like writing things, but I really truly was that guy with like, oh, nothing will happen. And I was wrecked by somebody else in my first race in a NASCAR stock car, and just got in and won the next week. We built the car. So again, lack of imagination. And that thing was totaled. I flipped that car 13 times, got out of the car pissed off, and wanted to punch him in the head. But then I told the guy, we're building this car and putting it back on the track next week, and we're kicking his butt. And we did, which was great in my first 2 races ever. But after that wreck, we were running a Legends car of all things too, which is a terrible race car. Sorry, guys. Sorry, Humpy Wheeler. The Legends car was a bad idea, or a good idea poorly executed. And I'm like, wow, I can kill myself doing this. And Dale had died that year. I had seen that. And I'm like, it started to become really clear to me that I was in my 30s and getting older and not getting younger, and that everybody I was racing it with was 21 years old, it seemed like. A lot of the newer guys, the older guys were getting out. And I bailed. I said, I'm out of here. And at the end of the season, I failed to renew. I had a contract renewal. I said, I'm going to step away from this, and thank you very much. And
I had Derek Bell on one of my first shows and talking to him about this. And I asked him what I asked you. Do you get scared? Because to me, I mean, it's serious.
It's really serious
when you're out there. But talking to Derek Bell, I mean, in his early days, X amount of people died every week or, every race. And I just couldn't imagine. And he's like, look, I'm not a daredevil. I won't jump out of an airplane. I'm not, it's not like that. It's just like you worded it well, or the person that worded it for you about lack of imagination. I think you just can't think about that. And I think maybe the line in the sand moves a little bit at a time. I mean, because you didn't go from 0 to professional race car driver. You had some stuff in the middle that got you very comfortable.
Oh no.
Oh no. Okay.
So I told this story about 4 years ago. I was sitting on a table with Tommy Kendall. I'm not just name dropping. I'm just framing this with TK and Hobbs and Bill Oberlin, Moss, like the veritable legends, and Schlub's there, and Schlub being me. And we're talking there about racing, blah, blah, blah. And so TK, who knows me pretty well, I know all those guys. I knew Sterling pretty well, but it's those, being a journalist, I've got to be pals with those guys. Hobbs and I have gotten, over COVID, got really thick. We're pals. It's nice. And same with TK, I've known each other for years. People always introduce us and like, have we met? It's our funny little gag. So I'm sitting there and Hobbs goes, not Hobbs, but TK goes, you race stock cars. Why did you race stock cars? And Hobbs in perfect, what in the bloody hell would you race those terrible things for? And I said, well, here's what I thought. I thought American V8, at the time initially, bias ply tires, a carburetor, that it would be the cheapest way to go racing. And Bill Oberlin looked at me and just busted out laughing. And so TK goes, and what'd you find out? I said, I found out I was wrong. He goes, how long did it take? I said, 5 years. He goes, why didn't you know? I said, well, you guys use a motor race. And I said, yeah, we sure do. But I assumed that when you ran a Porsche Cup car that you replaced the race motor every race either. And they use them all year. And it never occurred to me to do anything else. And so what I did, I was working at an ad agency in Palo Alto. And I'm like, I'm going to go racing. And my friend's like, okay. And I had money to do it. So I went up there with a checkbook. And I went to the track, which is Altamont Raceway Park. And I go, I want to go racing. And he said, that's great. What do I do? He's like, fill out this form. So I fill out this form. He goes, you need to get a medical. I said, I got it. The websites are happening. So I go, here's my medical from my doctor. He goes, great. Get a picture right there. Perfect. What level do you want to race at? I go, I don't know. He's like, you want to be Challenge Charger, or do you want to be Grand American Modified, or what else? I said, well, I don't know, because I think I'm going to do some higher level stuff here. He's like, well, then you should probably get a Southwest Tour or a truck license. California Super Trucks is what they were called then. And I said, okay, sign me up for a Southwest Tour license. And so I got a Southwest Tour license. No, I got a truck license. And so I said, okay, so what's the deal? What do I do next? He goes, well, you need a car. I said, okay, well, what do I do that? He's like, well, there's a guy here that rents them for races. It's an arrive and drive program. I'm like, arrive and drive? What is that? And they go, well, they roll off the cars. They get you ready to go. You have to have safety gear. You show up and you race the car. I said, what's that cost? They told me. I said, okay. I said, well, we'll introduce you. He's down there testing. I said, great. So I went down there and I met a guy that goes, Greg, this is Andy. Andy, it's Greg. Andy wants to race one of your cars. And he goes, great. He goes, getting experience? I'm like, no. He's like, you ever been in a racing school? I said, no. He's like, okay, we'll teach you. And so I got in the race car the next weekend. I got safety gear from a company in Wine Country Motorsports at Sears Point. And I didn't get Simpson like all the NASCAR guys. Here's the funny thing. I'm a Formula One and endurance racing fan going NASCAR racing. So I get an Arai helmet, a Sparco suit, Sparco gloves. And my outfit, I'm like the only guy wearing the Formula One crap, but I knew it was the safest stuff. And people are like, wow, you spent $1,000 on a helmet. I'm like, yep, I sure did. You know, you can get a bill for $300. Yes, I do. But I was just like, I was copying Schumacher, but I figured if Schumacher wore that stuff, then that's probably the best stuff in the world to buy. And it's the safest. So I bought all his stuff. And I showed up there and went racing and was terrible. And he's like, you're just terrible at this. I said, I know. So we did about 100 laps at this half-mile oval.
You're just terrible, I know.
I didn't know what I was doing, And so I got better and better as the day went on. I wasn't just terrible. Probably did 100, 150 laps at a half-mile track. So I did all this. He's like, okay, there's our first races next week on Friday. And I went, okay. So I show up there. And this is California Super Trucks is like this exhibition series at this point. It's not Craftsman Truck Series. It's not points. It's just this thing. But it's basically a 9-to-1 Winston Cup chassis, 9-to-1 358 cubic inch Winston Cup chassis. Run this Ford, and I'm racing the race, and I'm not in the back, and I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like blocking everybody. I'm driving like an idiot because I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the rules are, except what I've learned in 100 and some laps at the practice. And somebody comes into me, a guy named Dave. Coming out of turn 4, I was finally opening up the wheel for the first time to push the race car out, which was the hardest thing to darn well learn. And I just felt like you'd hit the wall. And I finally let the car free up, and I went, whoo. And I was just, unloading it to slide up to the wall. And this guy named Dave made an error and caught me in the left rear quarter with his right front, flipped me on my roof, and sent me down the front stretch wall. And I remember thinking to myself, and I'd read a lot of books about stock car racing. And what I read about, I didn't read like how to do it books. I read like Richard Petty's biography and Dale and everybody, Cale Yarborough's biography. And there's a lot of tips in those. And I remember reading in Petty's biography that when you're upside down in a race car, take it out of gear and hammer the gas against the limiter to keep it from starving fuel and stalling. So if you end up on your wheels again, the car's still running. So I did that. And at the time I'm thinking, wow, this looks just like ESPN because I'm upside down, right? I'm like, this looks just like it does with the in-car camera. And I came off the wall and tumbled about 8 times. No, actually more than that. I think it was like 13 times down the front stretch. And the car's still running. And the red flags are out. And guys run over, get out of the car. I said, no, leave me alone. Drop a yellow flag. I'm driving this car. It's fine. And he said, no, you don't understand. I said, no, shut up. I'm driving this car. It's still running. I don't want to shut it off. They go, here's the deal. Leave it running. Get out of the car. And when you look at the car, then tell us if you're going to go racing. I went, okay. So I popped my harness and popped the net, climbed out of the car. And there was like the chassis and the cab and the engine missing a fender, and there wasn't a corner on the car. There was one wheel on it, and the rear end's in the turn, in the middle of the front stretch. And I'm like, okay, I get it. But my crew chief at the time thought I was dead. Absolutely thought I was a dead person. And you'd understand, I've got a video of it somewhere that's on VHS, but the funny thing is, I got out there. They go, my guy Greg, who I was running the car, and said, "So you done?" I said, "No. Put the car back together. We're gonna kick ass with it next week." And we did. We won our race. I got my first Bud Pole Award with that car. I got my first win with that car. And the second day I'm out. And, but then my crew chief I gathered at that second race was someone who was on their team, a guy named Bob Johns, who's the best ever. He used to work with Brendan Gaughan after I was gone. No pun intended there, but he moved up. I did not. He said, you need some training. And he sent me to Buck Baker School. And I learned a lot at Buck Baker School because I actually learned in 4 days actually how to do this stuff because I really didn't know what I was doing. And so, but all you had to do was pay I think it was $250 for the truck license or $300 for the truck license, your medical, fill out the form and get a car. And that was it. It's not that way anymore, but that's as simple as it was. You could get everything but a cup license that way.
Now, this car that you rolled and 8 times or 12 times, and you said, you actually were lucid enough while rolling to remember what you're reading in this autobiography about keep it on the rev limiter.
Yeah, and I was talking this to another racer, and I think that's kind of when I remember telling my crew chief this story. He's like, "You're the real deal. That you're not Jeff Gordon, but you're a real racer." I go, "Why?" Because normal people can't do this, and their brains don't work that fast, and they don't think goofball stuff like, "Wow, it looks like the in-car camera at ESPN in the middle of it," and they're not watching their gauges at this point, and that's when I was like, he's like, "You just don't know what you're doing, but you've got the brain for this." And
were you in an arrive and drive car in this wreck?
Oh yeah.
So what happens there?
I wrote a giant check. We ended up buying cars later.
You didn't get the damage waiver?
There's no damage waiver. There's damage waivers $500. After you go over $500, it's all on you. And I wanted to put that number 6 truck back together, and so we did. I've actually got the roof to that truck in my shed. It has traveled with me everywhere I've moved because we cut the bent. I mean, the roof was bent like a pretzel. It was totally bent in, but I've kept that roof forever that my guy cut off. I said, I want the roof. He said, we need to cut the roof off. I said, I want that. And that's been like this curio that has traveled with me ever since. Because we took that next race, that same race car, and I won a Bud Pole Award and won a race with it the week afterwards.
This has been Jeff Stearns, Connected Through Cars.